Thanks so much, Anna. Thank you. Bye for now. Bye-bye. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along today. It's brilliant to see so many of you here. As Anna said, there's people from literally all around the world, and there's hundreds of us gathered here today. So that's brilliant that we can all be together. It is something I love about being online. And just to reiterate what Anna said, all these slides will be available to you after the webinar. So if you want to make notes, sure, go ahead, please do. But if you don't have to. And there's going to be a recording. So again, you can revisit the webinar, pick out little bits that you wanted to see again. During the webinar, I'm going to be using only these PowerPoint slides and the chat box. And that's just because I don't know how good or bad your internet connection is. So I want to keep it as simple and as easy as possible. So if you want to interact, you're able to do so and no one's left out. And thinking about the interaction, I'd love it to be an interactive webinar. So I'm going to ask you lots of questions as we go along, and I'd love you to answer in the chat box. So if you do want to take part, that's great, please do. But equally, if you're just feeling a bit tired today, if you just don't fancy interacting in that way today, if you just want to relax, watch and listen, then please do so. It's your webinar, it's your decision, and we'll find out in a minute that choice, autonomy of choice is really important for motivation. So please choose how you wish to interact. Let's have a look at what we're going to cover today then. So in this webinar, over the next 50 minutes or so, we'll consider how the pandemic has affected teaching. So we'll look at how that's been for you. We'll look at some of the positives of online teaching, and we'll do a bit of a comparison for the online and offline teaching. We'll also explore the meaning and role of motivation in the classroom, because it's pretty hard to define, and it's actually pretty hard to observe precisely. So we'll look at a bit of the theory there, and I'll ask for your help with that, with some definitions. And third, the final point, we're going to discuss some points to remember, so some tips and techniques, and we'll look at some classroom activities. So there are activities that you can take away and use in your next lesson, or there are things for you to think about as regard your general teaching or even your career. So let us begin then. We're starting off with how the pandemic has affected your teaching. So we're in, I think, the 15th or 16th month now of the pandemic in the UK. It's been around for a little while. And I'd like to ask you, how has it affected your teaching? How do you feel? I've got 3 groups of emojis here, number 1, number 2, number 3. So could you have a look and tell me which of these groups of emojis, or more than one, reflects your teaching? Lots of 2s at the moment. A 1, 2, then 1. I'm pleased to see, oh, there's a 3, a little bit of 3. Yeah, so I guess 1 is a very positive experience, like a party. It's been wonderful, you love it. 2, somewhere in the middle, it's been a bit, but you're still smiling even though things are turned upside down. I think 2s are probably the most frequent number I'm seeing. And 3, oh, it's been awful. Angry, sad, feeling dehumanized, a bit like a robot. Mostly 2s. All right, great. I think I've been 1, 2, and 3, but I've definitely learned to love some things about online teaching. And this is a little word cloud of the positives for me personally. So I've got real world, because I think it reflects the real world. Whatever industry we're working in, we've all had to move online to some degree, haven't we? And it's safe. We're not going to go out and transmit a virus or get a virus. What else? Pronunciation. I think it's great, really great for teaching pronunciation, because you can really get up close and personal with this camera, which probably you wouldn't do face to face. I love the breakout rooms and that focused concentration that pair work or group work can achieve in there. I love the chat box. As we can see, that's working really well. You're all chatting away and I can see what you're saying. That's fantastic. Employment, for those of us who've been fortunate enough to keep our work, that's a real positive, isn't it? So could I ask you to write a couple of positive things that you like about online teaching in the chat box? Okay. Yep, they all sound good. Great. Let's have a little look now. We've spoken a little bit about online. So you know the title of this webinar is Teaching and Motivating Adults Online and Offline. And by offline, I simply mean a traditional face-to-face synchronous classroom. So can I ask you, in that classroom, the face-to-face one, do you have aims, outcomes, and do you prepare lessons? Yes or no? Yes, yes, yes. Lots of yeses, fantastic. Do you have aims, outcomes, and prepare lessons in an online environment? Lots more yeses again, fantastic. All right, so they're kind of the same in that regard. What about the next point? Do you stage activities and the flow of lesson? Is that the same online and offline? Of course, says Thomas. Yes, 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 yes. Lots of yeses, the same, more or less. Yeah, exactly. And what about the next one? Setting up activities and using concept check questions. And the next one, managing class interaction. And the next one, allowing for silence. And the last one, providing feedback and making assessments. Is it yes for all of them? Yes, and there's a smiley face. I love an emoji. Thank you, whoever did that. All the same. Yeah, exactly. And the point I'm trying to make with this slide is just to say that whatever your teaching context, online, face-to-face, business English, IELTS class, teenagers, adults, one-to-one, a class of 20 students, underpinning those classes, the foundations are the same. Teachers will be there to teach and students are there to learn. There are so many similarities there. Let's press on to our second section. So exploring the meaning and role of motivation in the classroom. So like Anna said, motivation is incredibly important to language learning. And also it is a huge field in linguistics, in psychology, in neuroscience. It's massive and it's still very active and still very strong. So we're still learning so much about it. So we won't get to cover everything in as much detail as I'd love to in this webinar, but we'll do a little bit. So what we're going to do first of all, though, is to attempt to define what motivation is. So we've just said about concept check questions and setting tasks up. So I'd like to give you a task now. This is your task. I'm going to show you a definition. The definition will have 4 gaps. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd like you to complete the gapped words in the chat box. And I would like correct spelling. So can I concept check that task? What is it you're going to read? A definition, thank you. I think that was Laura in first, well done. So you're going to read a definition. How many gaps are there? 4, fantastic. Where are you going to write the answer? Chat, I think that's Jose is in there first. And does your spelling need to be correct? Yes, of course it does. We do like correct spelling. So that's perfect. Thank you for listening. You know the task. Here is the task. Amir has got the first one correct. Alma has got the second correct. I'll give you the answers in a minute. Number 4, yes, oh, sorry, I missed your name. Number 4 is correct. Have we had any answers for number 3 yet? Number 3? Oh, Sylvia, I think was first in with correct spelling, because remember, we want the correct spelling as well. So here's the complete definition for you. And that's just an example of why I love the chat box, because you can do so much there, and it's such a natural, good way of testing spelling and typing. I'm not a good typist, I'm very inaccurate. So your typing, your spelling has been brilliant. Let's look at the definition. So motivation is a state of cognitive and emotional arousal, which leads to a conscious decision to act and gives rise to a period of sustained intellectual and or physical effort in order to attain a previously set goal. So I think this definition is pretty good to me. We've got the emotional side of things, because that's definitely a huge factor in emotion. We've got that decision that, oh, I've identified what it is that I want to do. And we've got that sustained intellectual and or physical effort. So you've got to activate it and do something about activating that decision. And that decision is, of course, the goal. And goals are also, as I'm sure you know, very important for language learning, whatever those goals may be. What else do we know about motivation? So we know that it's a multifaceted construct. So it comes in all shapes and sizes. It's very difficult to observe. And it's a construct. It is a set of ideas. It's not a tangible thing. It's quite difficult to observe. Do we really know when a student is motivated or not? I'm not sure. Is it the student who's smiling and nodding and listening? Is it the one who's busy writing, typing away on their phone? Is it the one that's staring out the other way? We don't really know. It's changeable and it's resultative. So it is a dynamic beast. So today's motivated learner is tomorrow's demotivated learner. It can change, and often that's a result of the environment, the context. We know that it's unique to each learner and that it's interconnected with individual differences. So things like aptitude, attitude, and efficacy and self-belief all come into play with motivation. Let's look at two broad distinctions that are commonly made in motivation. So here's the first one, intrinsic. And as you can see, it's wrapped up in this bubble. It's internal. So it's that motivation that of personal satisfaction. So maybe someone wants to learn a language because they've got a positive attitude towards that culture, those people, that country, something like that. And who has, someone I think has written, what's the opposite of intrinsic? What's the other broad definition for motivation? Extrinsic. I think that's Theo got that, I think. So extrinsic, and X for external. And that's a motivation of something more tangible. So it might be achieving 7.5 on IELTS. It might be getting a better job or a better promotion. So those are the two broad distinctions. Let's look at the cycle of motivation. This is from Dornier, who is the motivation king, has done a great amount of studies within this field. So this is really interesting, and all of this rings true to me in this cycle. And do notice that it is a cycle. It is going to be there perpetually repeating itself. So if we start at number one, choice motivation at the top, and that's when that goal, that idea, that motivation, that's when it's born. It's generated and it's selected, and there's a decision that that's the goal. Number two is the executive motivation, when things are now in progress and they've been activated, but they now need to be maintained and protected. So whatever that goal is needs a little bit of help to keep going. And that's probably where we notice when it's absent in the classroom, when there's demotivation, when we're not doing enough to maintain and protect that motivation. Then we go round to number three, nearly the last one, but remember it's a cycle, it goes round. So number three, motivational retrospection. And that's when the goal has been completed, and maybe that goal has been achieved. And so there's now a new landscape. So we need to look at, well, this goal's achieved. So what's the next step? Where are we going now? And then we go back round 1, 2, 3 in that cycle. But if on that motivational retrospection, we look and maybe the goal hasn't yet been achieved, or there's a problem, then we could end up with a demotivated student. So my next question to you is, can you identify a demotivated student? And if so, how? So yes, you can identify it. How? Body language, their attitudes, their absence, not responsive, they're passive, silence, lack of participation, they complain, bad behavior. Yes, all of these are fantastic. Lack of concentration, lack of engagement, playing around with something, not listening, silence. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. all of those. And it's interesting, isn't it? We do attribute certain behaviors to a lack of motivation. So let's look at how to avoid demotivation. And of course, by avoiding demotivation, what I'm saying is it's increasing motivation. So we've got 6 points here, which I think are great. So we've got fostering a supportive learning environment, which is always key to your classroom. Given clear instructions, again, always really important and really helps students to navigate their way through the lesson. Level of task should be attainable. Yes, we want to challenge students, but we want to make sure we're giving them support to achieve those tasks. Prioritize communicative tasks. Absolutely. Chat rooms, breakout rooms, all of that allow us to do that. Be alert to low self-efficacy or anxiety. Definitely. And that's where those individual differences come into play. So you want to be aware of how your students are feeling in your class. Is there one who's quite reticent about speaking and doesn't really want to participate? What can you do to make them feel a bit more comfortable about it? And the last point, encouraging extensive reading. And I love this point because that's just a reminder of the need to make sure students are doing more outside of your lesson time. So there's some sort of extracurricular commitment to learning English. And please note the date of this. This is from 1993. So it's ancient. It's very, very old. And it's deliberately chosen because, again, I want you to remember that teaching is teaching. Whatever the context, it's teaching. And we want motivation in whatever teaching context that is. Online, offline, children, adults, exams. We always want motivated students. So as I said, I really love these 6 points, but I do think there's one point that's missing. What could we add on to that? Any ideas? Relate to everyday anecdotes. That's nice to promote relevance, personal interaction, emotion, goal setting. I think that was Marcus. I love all these ideas. They're fantastic. I'm going to add on goals for this one. And a couple of the others are in the chat box I'm going to come back to at a later time. Don't worry that they're all included later. So goals, we've got 3 things here. And they're actually very, very, very similar to Dornier's cycle of the choice, executive, and motivational retrospection. So we start that first point, envisioning the future self. So that's the student's ideal L2 self. How do they imagine them as an L2 user in the future? Is it giving a presentation in English? Is it getting a good grade? Whatever it is, what is it that they've imagined? They've identified their goal. We've then got that choice and autonomy results in greater motivational effort. That's from Locke, and that's goal-related theory. And that's really important because we've got to remember students have to be free to identify what that goal is. They'll be more motivated compared to if a teacher tells them what their goal is. So that's important to remember. And the last point, remembering and working towards goals has a positive impact on motivation. So that's interesting. We've got to keep it in mind. What is the goal? Are we working towards it each lesson? Even in little steps, what are we doing to keep moving towards that goal? Let's move on to the last point. Discuss points to remember and look at some classroom activities. So if you've come to one of my webinars before, you know that I love an acronym and I love those letters to frame the techniques. We're not going to do that today. I'm going to use the letters of the alphabet instead. Not all 26 of them. We're just going to go up to the letter G. So A, the first letter of the alphabet, obviously. A is for agreement. It's the first letter and it's the first piece of advice and it's the first thing to do on your first contact and your first commitment from the students. Do it right at the beginning. It's really, really important. And it doesn't have to be in any way difficult. By an agreement, I don't mean a big legal, scary document. I simply mean just a little set of rules, ideas of what we want from the lessons and how the student's going to get those things. Will they do extra speaking practice, for example? So before we make the agreement, we're going to start at the top of this cycle, and it needs analysis, which simply means just looking and seeing where are the students now? What's their linguistic performance level? What's their competence like? What are the areas that they do need extra work on? Have you heard them make 3 fossilized errors? Are those things that you can help to get rid of? And what are their goals? What are they aiming for? What can you do to move them towards it? Then, having done that, you can actually establish that agreement, remembering that that's driven by the student. You're going to co-create it together, but the ideas are coming from the student. And then round to the lessons, and that's when it's all activated and put into practice. And hopefully those goals will be gradually achieved. Maybe you'll go up to needs analysis, refine those goals, make new goals, and come round again full circle. So you're continually progressing. Let's have a quick look at the agreement and ask what you could put in there. So this says which points 1 to 8, but unfortunately points 5 to 8 disappeared below the slide. You won't be able to see them now on the screen, I'm afraid, but when you get the slides at home, you will be able to read them. So could I ask you, just looking at points 1 to 4, which of those could you include in an agreement, in a contract with your students? 2, says Rosa. 1, 2, and 4, says Thomas. 2, Marika. 2 and 3, 2 for Paul. All of them, Tony? Yes. 3 and 4, all. 1, 3, and 4, 2, all of them. Super. Well, basically, I think you're all correct, because you can include anything you want in the agreement. It's entirely up to you and your individual teaching context. Make it as simple or as complex as you want. As an example, you could include any or all and more of these things. So the practicalities, the date and time of the lesson, the platform you're going to use. You can ask for commitments from students. So they will do their homework, for example, or they will check their internet. Is a good enough connection for your lessons. Goals, we've mentioned those. They've got to be in the agreement. They're crucial. Any specific needs. So if your students want to improve their presentation skills, can you ask them to do a presentation every week, for example? Is there anything particular that they need? And then round to rules. So maybe for teenage classes, you might want to say the camera must be on. You must participate. You must be joined into the class 10 minutes before the start time, something like that. So we've looked at A for agreement. The next letter in the alphabet is obviously B. Any ideas what the B tip or technique could be? What do you think? Brainstorming ideas from Amir? That's a good suggestion. I love that. Any other ideas? Brainstorming again. It's a popular one. Boosting confidence maybe. Books. That's nice. Brainstorming. Books. Okay, I'm going to go. Breathe. Super simple, but one thing we have learned from the pandemic is the importance of mental health and taking care of ourselves. So this is just a tiny reminder to sometimes take a breath, make sure you've had a break. Someone mentioned break a moment ago. Make sure you've had a break, make sure you've had a little rest, make sure you're able to teach well. Let's move on to C, the letter C. What could C stand for? Check-in, love that. Collaboration, that's coming up later. Cooperation, that's also coming up later. And collaborate, communicate. Creativity, yep, I think we've mentioned that one, haven't we? Commitments, calm, communicate. These are great ideas. I love these. I'm glad you've got those ideas, because I'm going to ask you a little task about them at the end. I've gone for C for community, and this is very much related to breathe, really, to that notion of self-care. And thinking back to the theories, we know that fostering a positive learning environment is good for learning and has a positive effect on motivation. And this is a way of addressing that and creating a mini community in your class, because it's a bit more challenging online when students are just turning up and being let into a screen in a virtual classroom. So I'd suggest just very simply setting up a social media group for your class. It could be a WhatsApp group if you want to have a little chat. It could be an Instagram group if you'd rather use photos. It could be a Facebook group if you want a bit more versatility, or even go into a Facebook room so students can chat together virtually there. And if you've got, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 one-to-one students, you can ask if they wanted to have a bit of a study buddy and create a little group for them as well. For this also, I've discussed these all about your students, but I think also for you as well as teachers, are there groups that you can join? Can you set up a little WhatsApp group with other teachers who have just qualified from the CELTA or who work in this particular city? Is there a way you can connect into people across the world in a Facebook group? Have a think about how you can create your own community as well. Let's move on to the next letter, letter D. And any ideas for what D might stand for? Determination, I love that one. Develop, decision, dynamic. Decision, demonstrate, diversity, right? These are super. Decide, development, detail, discipline. All of these are absolutely perfect words, great. I've gone with digital because I thought I can't possibly have a webinar which covers a bit of online and then not mention the word digital. So I've had to go for digital. I hope that's okay. And do you remember when we spoke earlier about virtual for online classes and for offline, for traditional face-to-face? We spoke about their similarities. And if you think about your face-to-face classroom and any need to physically prepare the room that you're going to be in, to take bits and bobs with you, props, books, marking books, attendance records, all those things we have to lug around. Also remember, it's the same with your digital classroom, with your desk. Make sure you're set up and prepared for the day. This is a very basic, simple point, but it just helps ease those stress levels and keeps you organized and keeps your students motivated then, because they know everything is sorted and prepared. So I've got here, for example, 2 headphones. I like a second monitor because sometimes I want to reference there, or I want to stand up, which is what I'm doing today when I'm talking to you. I've got my notebooks, my pens, some reference books. I've got my bottle of water. I've got a cuddly toy for a prop. I've got a stool because I like to fidget and move around. I can't sit in a chair very well. So think about how you can set up your own desk and make sure that you're as prepared as possible. Also, thinking about your own materials. I was talking with Anne at the beginning about most teachers like to create their own materials. So can I ask, is there something, do you create a lot of your own materials to use in the online classroom? Yes, yes. Sometimes, a lot. That's brilliant. I was thinking no one's going to say no, and no one has yet, so that's great. Yeah, so I think if you're creating your own materials and you're going to use them online, let's have a little think about what you can do there. So as you can see from these PowerPoint slides, that they are landscape. So it's not the perfect shape. If you're using a mobile phone, it doesn't sit that beautifully. So we don't know what devices our students always use. So you want to think that having probably less is more. We don't want lots and lots of text all over the page. Think also about the justification. So which side of the page that you want that text. Left is good because that's going to be easier for people to see on their devices. Think about the font size as well. I've got a variety of sizes here. And most of the things that in these slides are size 40 for reference. And then also think about the style of font that you want. So I'd suggest going for sans serif, which is without those extendable curly bits on the end of letters, which we see in serif. Bold is okay, but I would always avoid underlining or italics because that can present difficulties for students with dyslexia. And we want our materials to be inclusive. We don't want people excluded. You may also be thinking about, do I need to represent handwriting a bit better in font? So that would be useful maybe for teenagers, younger students. You might want to use something more fun, like Comic Sans, or for students who are adult students, but they're not with the Roman script in their L1. So you want to help them with their literacy. So you might want a sort of adult handwriting font, something like Sago Print. My third and last point for digital is to embrace the digital and go for it with the internet. It's there. It's such an amazing resource. You can go to TED Talks and have students listening, watch, follow the TypeScript. You can send them off into YouTube to research a topic. There's so much there to do. So I think really embracing it and grabbing it is a good thing. Make it digital is a little strand, a feature that runs through Speak Your Mind, and that's through all of the levels. This one's from starter level. That's the level that I wrote. It's for A1 plus students. So it's a low level, beginners. So there's a super simple task here. This is at the end of a lesson, and students have just been learning about, as you can tell, food, ordering food and drink in a cafe, that type of thing. And now there's just a make it digital, an activity to engage and personalize and get out there in the internet and see what they can find. And this is fine in the L1 or in English. If you're in an English-speaking country, English language country, then that's fine because the material, that social media page will be in English. If you're in a non-English language speaking country, that's also fine because students will have to translate and mediate that text from the L1 into English. So it's a valuable activity. So the next letter is the letter E. Can I ask you for ideas on what E might be? Energy, that's a great one. That's coming up later. Environment, emotional well-being, encourage, efficacy, effort. Great. I think this is a quite difficult word and I don't think anyone's going to get it, but I don't know. Engagement. All right, let me give you a bit of help. Can you find out what the word is now? Equilibrium. I think that was Amir in first. And also the typing, the spelling was perfect. There we go. Excellent. I do like a big polysyllabic word. There we go. So equilibrium. How many syllables are in equilibrium? 5. Thomas was straight in there. Brilliant. Can you tell me which syllable is stressed in that word? Laura has shown it. Yeah, great. So it's the L, the third syllable. And this is why I love the chat box. Again, even though we're doing pronunciation and I can't see you, you're still able to answer the question and still able to understand. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Let's have a little look at what equilibrium means. So it's all about that balance of trying to juggle things. So we want, and many of these words have come up earlier actually. So collaborative, we want activities that are collaborative. Absolutely, we've learned that through the theory. But we also want times when things are non-collaborative. So there's that change of pace. We want to think about communicative activities. So things like lots of speaking, pair work and group work, interaction going on. But sometimes we might want non-communicative activities. So maybe some written work by themselves. We want to think about the interaction as much as possible. Obviously, we want student talking time and students interacting together. But maybe you could also ask a student to lead an activity in your class. Or maybe with a teacher colleague, you could team teach and they could come into your class, you could go into theirs, and you could do a live listening, or students could interview you and give them another exposure to an English language user. That would be a good thing to do. Intensity, we want to think about the energy and the pace. So some activities are higher intensity and some activities are lower intensity, lower energy. So what's an example of a high energy activity? Pair work, group work, TPR, exactly. A scavenger hunt, lovely. Oh, those lessons sound fun. Competitions, mingling, speaking, teamwork, role plays, dictation, quizzes, yeah, exactly, debate, group work, all of these, and all of these things are mainly collaborative, aren't they? The high energy. How about a low intensity, a low energy activity? Could you give me an example of that? Reading, writing, some quizzes, yep. Writing, absolutely. Tests, yes. Questionnaires, fill in the gaps. Yeah, lovely. Great. Okay, well, I've got some examples here from a course book. And as we've said before, teaching is teaching, whatever the context. So these examples from a course book, we know they work. They've been designed and researched to work in the classroom. So now let's have a look at how we would adapt them for use in the online classroom, thinking about collaboration, communication, interaction, intensity, all those things that you're going to need to balance and think about. How could you use this activity? So this is a functional language activity. It's ordering food and drinks. And the task is very simple. Are the people in a coffee shop or a restaurant? And it's a double column dialogue there between a waiter and a customer. So already loads of ideas. That's for reading and writing, absolutely. A role play, perfect for a role play. You can pop the students into a breakout room. They can practice together, take turns, swap roles, practice again. So they've done both sides. What else could you do? Create their own dialogue. Excellent, that's a great idea. That's from Edda. Personalize it. More role plays. A vanishing dialogue. Exactly. Start wiping away some of those lines or some of the parts until students rebuild it. Recording the dialogue. I love that you've suggested that, and I'm sorry I've missed your name. I think that's brilliant. Particularly, remember, this is starter level, so it's A1, A2 plus. And it's brilliant for students at that level to still be working and practicing towards that letter-sound relationship in English. It's very valuable for them to spend time reading this aloud. Teaching some expressions, rewriting them. Yeah, go into a coffee shop. Yeah, I think this is one of the motivational things about it, that you could plan and look forward to the time that you and your class could maybe go to a physical cafe. Let's have a look at another activity. So I told you I love pronunciation teaching online. It's great because I think you really can probably show the mouth, the teeth, the tongue a lot more, probably more than if you were face to face, and just demonstrate that well. You could mime the sound as well and see if students can guess it. So here we've got just vowel sounds. A, e, oo. We've got these long sounds. So you could work on those. What else could you do with this if you wanted to change it? Make it collaborative, change the intensity, ask them to search for similar sound words, repeating, speak loudly. I love that for pronunciation. Shouting it, whispering it, fantastic. Drilling, classification of sounds, brilliant. Yes, because we've got short vowels, haven't we? A and e, and then we've got e, oo, the long vowels. Completing the gaps, minimal pairs work, exactly. Dictation and classification, yeah, lovely. These are super ideas. That's great. Is there, looking at the words, at the vocab, jacket, dress, skirt, jeans, shoes, what could you do with those words? Sort into the words in the correct column. Somebody mentioned TPR earlier. I'm just wondering if there could be something here. Yep, it's about clothes. So you could do a shopping for clothes. We role play, exactly. You could send the students off and say, can you get a pair of shoes? Can you get some jeans, a jacket, a dress? This can be with adults or with younger students, with teenagers, with young children, or with teenagers, or even with adults, actually. You can ask them to mime putting on all of these shoes. So they're getting that personalization and that little bit of fun and silliness, which always helps to make vocabulary memorable. You could present your favorite outfit. I love that, Catherine. That's lovely. Describe what you're wearing. There's so much you can spread out here from this one activity. And if we were in a normal workshop environment, I'd love to just say, here's one activity, go build a 60-minute lesson, because I think there'd be amazing ideas in here. They're fantastic. Let's have a look at another type of activity. So this is 2 reading text, 2 different text types. We've got Cook King, the king of dinners, which is an advertisement. And we've got Time for Breakfast, which is a review on a blog. What could you do with this online? Make a new story. Words from affixes, yeah. A Q&A. Sequencing, yeah, definitely. A cooking show, absolutely. And that's another great way of using the internet and going digital and exploring something together. Search their favorite dish on the net, excellent. Your favorite foods, find and present recipes. There's so much from a sort of low energy reading text. You can actually, brilliant examples of how to make this high energy and a bit more physical and a lot more engaging. Can I ask you, would you do a reading text like this in class time? As in, would you ask students to read this? Yes, says Michelle. Yes. Yes. Lots of yeses. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It's relatively short. Again, if it's lower level, it's that more practice of that sound letter relationship. So that would be great. You can pick out lots of vocabulary. You can pick out short vowels, long vowels, like we just looked at. There's a lot of mileage there. Lots of reasons to do it. And in fact, intensive reading is actually a really good thing to do online. It really helps, I believe. And let me ask if you need a break now. We're 40 minutes into the webinar, and I wonder if I could ask you now to look around you and find something that is red and tell me what it is in the chat box. I've got a red book as well. Headset cable, cup, shirt, tissue box, bottle, roses in my vase. Oh, lovely. Purse, blanket, a red tabby cat. Gorgeous. A red sleeve, red bag. Lovely. Can you find something that begins with the letter M for motivation? Ah, your mom's in the room. Lovely. Monitor, mat, mobile, mic. Fabulous. Can you find something that feels soft? A pillow, a blanket, cushion. Brilliant. Can you find something that makes you feel happy? My dog again, my husband, Sky. My earphones, fur to my family. Lovely. These are super ideas. And And let me present to you then three sets of ideas to go for breaks. So we've just looked at find something. So you can do this with anything though. So with a color, with a letter, with the size of something, with clothes when we spoke about pronunciation, with food, something that smells nice, feels soft, looks strange, emotions, how something makes you feel. Find something with English. You can have a proper 5-minute break and present this choice board to the students so they can choose whatever they want to do. So the 5-minute break would be an individual choice for students. Find something would be class-led, just as we've done now. Class activity, right at the bottom, that's going to be a class-organised break. And it's purely for the aim of changing the pace, changing the energy, getting a bit of rapport between your students going. So just do something that's a bit fun and a bit silly. Let's move on to our next letter. And that's F for feedback, because we know all along that the theory has told us we need to keep an eye on what the goals are. So we need to keep monitoring them, maintaining them and protecting them. Do you remember from that executive motivation of Dornier? So this is something which all teachers are going to be doing actively each lesson, I am sure. I've just looked at 4 main groups there in that big blue square. So feedback can be given from the teacher, T, to the students, S, SS. It can be whole class. So you could use a screen share and present some problems that the whole class experiencing and presenting to you. Or what if you've got a student that is feeling a bit anxious, doesn't really like speaking, but they contributed to a speaking task and they were great? Then you can send them a private message to just say, thank you, that was great, well done, and give them that little bit of motivation, that bit of encouragement, and show them you're appreciating it, and remembering that feedback is positive as well as correcting language isn't quite correct. Your feedback can be on the spot, so you can do it immediately using the camera, you can in the chat box, or you can do it post-task afterwards using screen share or something. And I've got on the side there 4 other points to remember with feedback is that it is omnipresent. So every time, do you remember actually when I asked you about demotivating students, and a lot of you mentioned body language and that type of thing? So that's feedback to you, isn't it, that they're not motivated? So feedback is omnipresent. It's every facial expression you make and your students make, every bit of body language that either of you make. It can be positive, as I've said. It's praising that good language or that good attempt at language. It can be negative if your student's language isn't quite correct, so you need it corrected a little bit. And it's 2-way. It's teacher to the student, but it's student to the teacher. And can I ask, how many of you ask for feedback from your students about your lessons? Yes. Jasleen says yes, occasionally. Wonderful. Lots of people do, sometimes, all the time. It can be super simple, you know. It could just be I liked it, I didn't like the lesson. It could be using those emojis. It could be I liked this week, I didn't like this week. They could fill in simple sentences. It could be a more formal questionnaire. You could team teach with another teacher and ask them to come in and take feedback from each other's class. There's lots of ways you can do it, and it's always valuable because we need to keep checking we're on the right path and we're moving towards our goals. G had to be goals, didn't it? Because it's just so important. And you've guessed goal before I've even said it. Yes. Wonderful. So goals brings us full circle back to this cycle of the needs analysis, the watching and seeing how we're doing, identifying where the students are now, down to the goals. Do they need to be tweaked? Have they been achieved? How's that going? And just that cycle. And remembering that goals can also be super small. It could just be, I'm not going to speak L1 in this lesson. They could be medium-sized. I'm going to do a lot more extensive reading this term. I'm going to read 5 braided readers, for example. Or they could be bigger goals. I'm going to get a promotion. I want 7.5 in my IELTS, something like that. So that's G, that's our final letter. So can I ask you now, can you remember A, B, C, D, E, F, G, what all these letters stood for our tips and techniques we've discussed? Agreement, thank you. Amir's straight in there. Breathe, oh, I lost your name then, sorry. Equilibrium, community. What about D? Digital, Yes. E, we've had your equilibrium, also beautifully spelt. Thank you very much. Wonderful. F was feedback. Wonderful. And G was goals. And there's an H. H for homework. It is optional because we've learned by now that choice is really important in motivation. So if you don't want to do it, that's fine. If you do want to do it, you've got 2 options again to choose from. So if there were 2 points from this webinar that you enjoyed, could you share them? Thinking about that community and supporting others, could you share them with a teaching friend or share them online? And or would you like to climb a Padlet with me? So this is the only online tool that I've mentioned. If you want to go to it, if you're always registered in it, that's the address. So padlet.com, ronasnelling/alphabet. And we've looked at A, B, C, D, E, F, G today. So those tips and techniques are in there, in that alphabet. But can you add other tips and techniques for the other letters of the alphabet? So for example, if you've got a great tip about reading, go in there, grab the letter R and pop in your tip. That would be wonderful. And if you include your name, that would be even better because I'll know who said it, and you'll be able to have the credit for creating a great idea. So let's have a quick review of what we've covered in this webinar. We have considered how the pandemic has affected teaching. And you've described 1, 2, 3, all those emojis, how you felt during it. We looked at the positives, and we looked at online and offline teaching together and found that there are some foundations between them. We've looked at the meaning and role of motivation in the classroom. You helped me create that definition, and we had a look at that cycle of motivation by Dornier. We've looked at demotivation and how to avoid that. And finally, we've discussed points to remember and looked at classroom activities through A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And we might be sharing some ideas and or creating a Padlet of ideas. So my final point to say is a very, very big thank you for coming along today, for all of your brilliant, brilliant ideas and brilliant suggestions. I'd love to know what you're going to say in the Padlet. Thank you for giving your time. And I hope you find it very useful. And hopefully I will see you again online or face-to-face at some point. And I believe Anna will reappear magically in a moment, and then we've got some time to have a look at some questions and answers, because I've seen you've sent a few questions here and there. They're not always easy for me to answer when I'm going through the main slides, but hopefully we can go through those questions now. Hey. Oh, well, look at their comments. They're amazing, the ideas and the energy. Fantastic, as always, brilliant. It's too quick.
Lovely. I think there's so much in this session, and there were quite a lot of good questions as well, but we probably don't have time to look at all of them. But one question that I thought was really pertinent in the situation we're still in with this online teaching, and a lot of us teachers having trained as face-to-face teachers. Do you think we should have a different time limit or class times when you look at online teaching versus face-to-face to actually maintain that motivation in the classroom?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, I'd lean towards it's probably going to be a shorter lesson, and or you're going to do a bit more flipping. So maybe if there's a big chunky reading text of 800 words, you don't want to spend your 60 minutes in your English lesson covering that. So maybe you want to flip that and move that to be done prior to the class. So your class is a lot more about the communication and the check-in of ideas with the teacher.
So that really fits in nicely with that optional homework then, right? They could do the reading at home.
So it does.
Nice. Really, really valid idea, I think, because we don't want to waste that time sitting in front of a screen while we're all seeing the top of our heads because we're reading. So
exactly. And I think also it's that idea of just pushing English into other parts of their life as well. So it just gradually becomes part of their whole life identity. It's not just on a Thursday at 10 a.m. You know, it's there and more active and more important.
And I think that's probably a distinction we see with students who study English because they're intrinsically motivated. They take it outside the classroom, whereas those other students who are extrinsically motivated maybe struggle more with that.
Definitely.
So that leads me to the next question, actually, about that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. What do you do with students who are in your class and it's a smaller group who's really motivated, the other group is not so motivated? How can we sort of balance that out and make it work so that all can make some progress in our classroom? Any tips?
That's a tough one. I mean, you could do a little bit of swapping of students between the groups so the energy changes a bit, because sometimes it's particularly, for example, if you're organising breakout rooms, you might want to prepare those before and think, well, this person's super positive, super confident, so I want them in that group to balance out that equilibrium again, balance out against the less motivated, shall we say. But it's also maybe just looking at, well, why is that group feeling a bit flat and demotivated? And feedback, asking them why, you know, very, very bluntly and very openly, and in that spirit of, well, I want you to have a good lesson. It's important for me that you learn. So what's preventing that happening? And if maybe you could team teach and grab another teacher to do that. If your students felt more comfortable talking, they didn't want to offend you, for example, but they might be able to say to another teacher, I really don't enjoy doing the writing. I don't want to speak with X in my group. And maybe you'd find out a bit more of the source of why there's that demotivation.
And be able to work with what works for your students then, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely. Very much focusing on the needs or the interest of our learners. Somebody asked as well in the chat box a little bit more about goals. Should they be discussed with the students? Should we involve them in setting those in the classroom, or should I sort of set them for my learners at this lower level?
Yeah. Well, I think definitely theory says you've got to give that choice and that autonomy to the students. It's up to, that's part of buying in with that motivation. So yes, I want to improve my speaking, and maybe that's then where the teacher steps in and says, well, you know, in that case, you've got to participate in more speaking tasks. That's going to get you to your goal. And maybe then the teacher can step in and do a bit more nudging towards the goal. But that initial idea, I think, is definitely generated from the student. And you want that collaboration, that co-creation between the teacher and student. So you're working together, that shared goal.
And how do you deal with students then who have this very long-term goal? For example, I teach a lot of IELTS. I got students coming in, band score 5, teacher, I want 7. I mean, that's the goal. Well, it's clear, right?
That is one of the large goals, isn't it? And I think the first thing, I absolutely love it when students say that, because I love that, the hugeness, that big ambition. And then it's just, okay, so let's break that down. We're not gonna do it tomorrow, but let's look at a time frame. So when can you realistically give a go at trying to achieve that mark, and at what point? So what do we need to do in all those in-between stages? And if I'm currently at 4.55, there's a lot more foundational work to do before we get up to achieving those fantastic band scores. So I think it's just breaking it down and having those mini goals along the way, and absolutely keeping in sight and supporting the big goal. Yes.
And breaking them up in sort of manageable chunks. That might be
manageable chunks. That's the word I was trying. That's the phrase I was trying to remember. Perfect. Yes.
Oh gosh, there's so many other questions. Let me see. There's one more I'd like to know about feedback. We give positive feedback, but we also give constructive feedback, which might be demotivating for some students. Have you got any tips how we can manage that so we do maintain that level of motivation?
Yeah. It's a difficult one, isn't it? So I think it's definitely, sometimes it's cultural, isn't it? And sometimes it's back to those individual differences. So if you know one particular student will be absolutely mortified by the words you say, even if they're not that negative in themselves. It's just being incredibly super sensitive about it. It's maybe including a lot of completely obviously positive, this was fantastic, you're so brilliant in class, and thank you for coming on time, you always do your homework. There's always something positive that I think that you can put in, and then it's just very gently phrasing and supporting, I think.
Yeah, I like that idea as well, that you have the not there yet, that growth mindset, right? When you talk about it, it's not that you can't do it, but it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Lovely. I'm going to ask the last question before I'm going to move on and tell everyone about certificates again. Very nice question from Michael, who is saying, a lot of teachers, we've lost our job or we've lost our regular income, and that can be a bit demotivating. We've got these lovely webinars, but anything else that you could recommend for teachers to stay motivated during these challenging times? Because they're not easy times for many of us.
No, they're not. And you've got to be completely honest and open about that. It's been a horrific time across the world for everyone. I don't think there's anything sort of hugely positive to say about it. I think it's probably thinking about what can I do to develop professionally in the meantime. So yes, it's going to webinars and learning a bit more, or maybe you want to make your own blog and start talking about your problems and the challenges you're facing to try and get employment. And trying that sense of community again, if there's a group that you can meet, because sometimes there's a value in having that group, a WhatsApp group, whatever, that you can just have a bit of a moan and just say, oh, it's awful, it's been months and there's still no job. Anything you can get that bit of empathy and support. And I know a lot of people have started, and I think a lot of people I see have sort of started their own online schools effectively at home. Teaching, so maybe that could be an option, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the community is really nice, and I really feel with Macmillan and all the webinars, there's so many people joining and sharing knowledge, and I mean we're all in the same water, but maybe in a different boat, but we're all
exactly
bobbing along, right?
Exactly.
15 months already. Good. Thank you, Rona, for all your magnificent ideas, practical ideas, and answering all these questions. It was a pleasure to listen to you.
Absolute pleasure for me. It is an absolute honour to come and meet everyone and chat to everyone. So thank you so much again, all of you, for your time. And thank you, Anna and Will, for hosting the event. They're so important at these times to get people together and have a sense of shared community.
And thanks to everyone in the chat box who's been so active, so motivated, and you're sharing, and that means caring. So that was lovely to have you here as well. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the examples that Rona was using in her webinar. They come from a book called Speak Your Mind. If you're not familiar with it, there's a beautiful red box that you can click on, and it will take you directly to the website. Thank you, Will, for putting that up. And Speak Your Mind is a 6-level series for young adults, and it's really focused on making English motivating and relevant for them. In various ways, it's got a real-life language that is brought into the classroom. There are, of course, lots of interesting topics, a lot of meaningful practice and authentic communicative activities where the students use that language. Also, it's got a series of Follow a Pro videos. So we're looking at people in a certain profession and they're following them around to get an idea of what it's like to live or work in a certain environment. It makes that learning also accessible because there is a beautiful student app. So if your students really like all that, they can hopefully do some extra practice on the app because there are lots of fun activities on that app that engages and motivates them again, hopefully. So that fits in with this whole motivation idea. Also for you as a teacher, it's a fully flexible course. So there are online materials, there is a workbook, there of course also the printed version. So you can choose how you want to teach it, fully face-to-face, fully online, maybe blended or maybe hybrid. All the tools for you are there in paper or online as well. Yes, so if you want to check it out, please go and look. Check it out on macmillanenglish.com/speak-your-mind. Oh goodness me. The end of the day for me. So follow the link that's up at the top of this slide.